We spent 400 billion credits building a weapon that freezes time itself, but the humans walked straight through it like it was a warm breeze. I have been working for the Vorothian Collective's Advanced Weapons Division for approximately 17 cycles now, and I thought I had seen everything. My name is Krelatoth, and I am what you would call a mid-level weapons engineer, which is a polite way of saying I am the person who gets blamed when things explode prematurely, but never gets credit when they explode on schedule. But this thing we built, this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be the weapon that would finally give the collective the edge we needed in the ongoing territorial disputes with, well, everyone really. The galaxy is a competitive place. You know, everyone wants the best systems, the richest asteroid fields, the most habitable planets, and everyone thinks they deserve them more than the next species. So there I was, standing in Laboratory Theta 9, watching our department head Grand Engineer Vosenarl, practically vibrating with excitement. The guy has 6 tentacles, and all 6 of them were twitching. That is never a good sign, by the way. When Vosenarl gets excited, it usually means someone else is about to do a very bad day. Colleagues, he announced, his voice booming through the laboratory's acoustics. Today we witness the culmination of 8 cycles of research, 400 billion credits of funding, and the combined efforts of our finest scientific minds. I glanced over at my workstation partner Heltrix, who was definitely not one of our finest scientific minds. The guy once tried to calibrate a plasma conduit with a wrench. A wrench. But sure, finest minds. Whatever helps the budget committee sleep at night. Behold, Vosenarl continued, gesturing dramatically toward the containment chamber at the center of the laboratory. The temporal stasis cascade. Now I will give credit where credit is due. The device itself was actually pretty impressive. At least from an engineering standpoint, it looked like someone had taken a small star, compressed it down to the size of a cargo container, wrapped it in about 40 layers of quantum shielding, and then decided to add some decorative energy coils just for aesthetic purposes. It hummed with power, a low thrumming that you could feel in your sensory organs. The principle was simple, or at least that is what the theoretical physics team kept telling us. The device generated a field that essentially hacked local spacetime, creating a bubble where temporal progression slowed to an almost complete stop. Not quite frozen, mind you, because true temporal stasis would violate about 16 different laws of physics, and the universe tends to get cranky about that sort of thing. But slow enough that anyone caught in the field might as well be a statue for all the good movement would do. The gravity manipulation on a quantum level, they said. Rewriting the fundamental constants of motion within a defined sphere of influence, they said. It sounded like nonsense to me, but then again, I just build the things. I do not have to understand why they work, just how to keep them from killing everyone in a 5-kilometer radius. Initiate test sequence alpha. Vosenarl commanded. And yes, he actually said it like that with the exclamation point and everything. The guy watches too many military drama holovids. The containment chamber's transparent walls shimmered as the test began. Inside we had placed specimens from 6 different species, all volunteers of course, because the ethics committee gets really annoying if you do not have proper consent forms. There was a Grelthian, a species known for their incredible reflexes, a Quelix, who could move through 3 spatial dimensions simultaneously, a Torthian, whose entire evolutionary advantage was based on rapid movement, and 3 others whose names I honestly cannot remember because, let's face it, when you work in weapons development you start to see test subjects as data points rather than individuals. The temporal stasis cascade activated with a sound like reality itself was being unzipped. The field expanded outward from the device, a nearly invisible shimmer in the air, and when it touched the test subjects, the effect was immediate and absolute. They stopped, not slowed down, not paused, but stopped. The Grelthian's tentacle was frozen mid-reach. The Quelix was stuck halfway between dimensions which looked deeply uncomfortable. The Torthian's wings were locked in mid-flap. It was beautiful, in a deeply unsettling sort of way. Temporal distortion confirmed at 99.97% effectiveness. One of the technicians called out. Neural activity reduced to 0.003% of baseline. Muscular response completely suppressed. They are effectively statues. The laboratory erupted in cheers. Engineers were hugging each other, tentacles and appendages waving in celebration, datapads being thrown in the air. Vosenarl looked like he might actually cry, if his species had tear ducts, which they do not, but the sentiment was there. I will admit, even I was impressed. We had actually done it. We had created a weapon that could stop anyone dead in their tracks without actually killing them. The military applications were obvious and terrifying. Drop this thing on an enemy fleet, and suddenly you have a collection of very expensive floating statues. Deploy it on a planetary invasion force and the invasion stops before it starts. The collective would be unstoppable. Deactivate the field, Vossatsauril ordered once he had composed himself. The shimmer disappeared, and the test subjects immediately began moving again, stumbling and disoriented but otherwise unharmed. Perfect. A weapon that incapacitated without permanent damage meant we could actually use it without triggering half the war crime protocols in the Galactic Convention. Over the next few weeks we ran test after test. Different species, different environments, different field strengths. Every single time the results were the same. 100% success rate. The temporal stasis cascade worked on everyone. Well, almost everyone. But we did not know that yet, because, and here is where it gets funny, we had not bothered to test it on humans. Why would we? The humans were newcomers to the galactic stage, barely a century into their spacefaring era. They were from some obscure death world in the outer rim, a planet so hostile that most civilized species would classify it as a hazard zone. Their technology was primitive by our standards, cobbled together from stolen designs and brute force engineering. Their military was small, their influence negligible. They were, as Vossatsauril had so eloquently put it during one planning meeting, those primitive bipeds from that death world who somehow managed to duct tape themselves into space. The entire department had laughed at that one. Humans. Testing the temporal stasis cascade on humans would be like testing a warship's weapons on a particularly stubborn asteroid. Sure, you could do it, but why waste the resources? Oh, how we were going to regret that assumption. How we were all going to regret it so much. But for now, in this moment, standing in Laboratory Theta 9 watching our ultimate weapon perform flawlessly, we were confident, we were smug, we were absolutely certain that the temporal stasis cascade was going to change everything. And we were right about that last part at least. It did change everything, just not in the way we expected. The deployment order came through 3 weeks after our final successful test, and I remember thinking that the timeline seemed a bit rushed. But then again, I am just an engineer. Nobody asks for my opinion on military strategy, which is probably for the best because my opinion is usually maybe do not do that. The target was a human cargo vessel, the SS Perseverance, which had been detected hauling refined metals through the contested border zone between collective space and the neutral corridors. Now technically, the humans had every right to be there. The neutral corridors were, neutral, but the collective strategic command had decided that a demonstration was necessary. Show the galaxy what our new toy could do, send a message, establish dominance, all that usual military posturing nonsense. I was not supposed to be on the strike cruiser Vengeance's reach. My job was done. The weapon worked, the field tests were complete, and I should have been back in my laboratory, working on the next overpriced doomsday device. But Vossatsauril had insisted that a member of the engineering team be present for the first live deployment, just in case any technical issues arose that needed immediate attention. So there I was, strapped into a jump seat in the observation deck of a military vessel, watching through the view screens as we approached the human ship. The Perseverance was not particularly impressive, just a standard cargo hauler, maybe 200 meters long, with the kind of boxy utilitarian design that screamed we built this to work, not to look pretty. It was coasting along its standard velocity, completely unaware that it was about to become a test subject. Commander Thexaral, who was in charge of this little operation, was practically glowing with anticipation. His species has bioluminescent patches on their carapace that respond to emotional states, and right now he looked like a festival decoration. All stations, prepare for temporal stasis cascade deployment, he announced over the ship-wide communication system. Engineering confirm weapon status. Weapon is charged and ready, Commander, the weapons officer reported. Field generator operating at optimal parameters. Targeting solution locked on the human vessel. I checked my own monitoring station, reviewing the data streams from the Cascade device. Everything looked normal. Power levels were stable. Quantum matrices were aligned. Gravitational anchors were secure. This was going to work exactly like all our tests. I was certain of it. Fire, Thexaral commanded. And the universe decided to start laughing at us. The temporal stasis cascade activated with that same reality unzipping sound, and the field expanded outward from our ship, racing across the void between us and the Perseverance. Our scanners tracked it perfectly, showing the shimmer envelope engulfing the human vessel, penetrating its hull, flooding its interior spaces. Every sensor confirmed field activation. The temporal distortion readings were exactly where May should be. 99.97% effectiveness. Just like in the laboratory. The observation deck erupted in cheers. Officers were congratulating each other. Tactical displays were lighting up with success indicators, and Thexoral was already composing his after-action report in his head. I could see it in the way he was gesturing, practicing his speech to the high command. Boarding party, proceed to secure the vessel, Thexoral ordered. Remember, the crew will be immobilized but aware. Standard seizure protocols apply. Our boarding craft, detached from the Vengeance's reach. A sleek assault shuttle, carrying 12 armed soldiers and enough scanning equipment to catalog every bolt on that cargo ship. I watched them approach the Perseverance, feeling a strange sense of unease that I could not quite identify. Something felt wrong, but I could not point to any specific data that supported that feeling. The boarding craft reached the Perseverance's airlock and began the docking procedure. Standard stuff, really. Mag clamps engaged, pressure seals verified, cutting torches prepared in case the airlock would not cooperate. The whole process took maybe 3 minutes, and then the Perseverance's airlock opened from the inside. I blinked at my screen, certain I had misread the sensor data, but no, there it was, clear as anything. The airlock was opening, and someone was moving inside the human ship. Commander, the boarding party leader's voice came over the comm, sounding confused. The airlock it just opened on its own, sir. Impossible, Thexoral said, leaning forward in his command chair. The crew should be completely immobilized. Check your readings. There must be an automated system. Sir, I am not reading any automated systems. I am reading oh no. The camera feed from the boarding party's helmet cams appeared on the main view screen, and I felt my internal organs try to rearrange themselves in panic. 5 humans walked out of the airlock. Just walked out. Not slowly, not stiffly, not struggling against the temporal distortion field. They walked out like they were strolling through a park on a sunny day, completely and utterly unaffected by the weapon that should have turned them into statues. One of them, a female with short dark hair and wearing a maintenance jumpsuit, actually waved at the boarding party. She waved, like she was greeting neighbors. Hey there. Her voice came through the comm, cheerful and entirely too casual for someone who was supposed to be frozen in temporal stasis. You folks having some kind of emergency? Need a tow? The observation deck went silent. Absolutely silent. You could have heard a pin drop, if pins made noise in the vacuum of space, which they do not. But you understand the sentiment. Fire again, Thexoral shouted, his bioluminescence flickering erratically. Increase field strength to maximum. Now. The weapons officer complied, and I watched the power levels spike as we poured every available erg of energy into the temporal stasis cascade. The field intensified. The distortion readings went through the ceiling, and the very fabric of space-time around the Perseverance started doing things that would make a theoretical physicist weep. The humans did not even flinch. In fact, one of them, a tall male with a beard, pulled out some kind of handheld device and started scanning our boarding craft.
Huh?
He said, his voice thoughtful. That is a weird gravitational signature you guys are putting out. Is that supposed to be a weapon? Because I gotta tell you, it feels like a really aggressive massage chair. Boarding party, retreat immediately. Thexoral commanded, but it was already too late. The humans moved, and when I say moved, I mean they moved with a speed and efficiency that our temporal distortion field should have made absolutely impossible. One moment they were standing at the airlock, the next moment they were swarming over our boarding craft like humans, which was apparently a terrifying thing to be compared to. They were not violent, which somehow made it worse. They just casually disabled our soldiers, gently removing weapons, politely asking them to please stop struggling, and systematically dismantling every piece of military hardware on the boarding craft with the kind of calm competence that suggested they had done this before. Sir, one of our soldiers shouted over the comm, they are taking our equipment apart. One of them she just unscrewed our plasma rifle's containment chamber with her bare hands. How is she doing that? Because it is a standard 3/4 twist lock, the human female replied, apparently hearing the question. Pretty basic design, honestly. You guys might want to upgrade your security features. My monitoring station started screaming alerts at me, not just from our deployment but from 3 other strike cruisers that had simultaneously deployed temporal stasis cascades against human targets across the border zone. All 3 were reporting the exact same thing. Field activation confirmed. Temporal distortion confirmed. Humans completely unaffected. One report included video footage of a human merchant crew playing some kind of card game while our field washed over them. They did not even pause their game. One of them did comment that the lighting looked weird for a moment, but that was it. Another report showed a human military patrol vessel that had not just ignored the stasis field, but had actually laughed about it. The commanding officer had sent us a message that simply read, "Nice try. Our morning coffee hits harder than that." I stared at my screens, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. This was impossible. The temporal stasis cascade worked on everyone. We had tested it on everyone. 53 different species, hundreds of test subjects, 8 weeks of continuous trials, 100% success rate. Except apparently not on humans. "Commander," I said quietly, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think we have a problem." Thexerol turned to look at me, his bioluminescence now a sickly flickering pattern that indicated extreme stress. "What kind of problem, engineer?" I gestured helplessly at the view screen, where the humans had finished securing our boarding party and were now examining our assault shuttle with the kind of interest that scientists show when dissecting a particularly interesting specimen. "The kind where our ultimate weapon does not work," I said. "At all. On an entire species." The observation deck remained silent, but now it was a different kind of silence. Not the stunned silence of shock, but the hollow silence of realization. We had just deployed our most advanced weapon against the one species in the galaxy that was completely immune to it, and we had done it in a way that was basically advertising its existence. The humans now knew we had a temporal stasis weapon. They knew exactly how it worked because they had just experienced it firsthand, and judging by the way they were carefully scanning every component of our boarding craft, they were going to figure out how to replicate it. One of the humans looked up at our ship, directly at our camera feeds, and smiled, just smiled, like she knew we were watching and found the whole situation amusing. "So," she said, her voice cheerful, "you folks want to talk about this, or should we just keep your boarding party for a bit? We have got plenty of coffee." The emergency council meeting was called 6 hours after what the official report would eventually call the Perseverance incident, which was a very diplomatic way of saying the time our ultimate weapon failed spectacularly and we got humiliated by a cargo hauler crew. I had never been inside the Grand Council chamber before. Mid-level engineers do not usually get invited to meetings with the high command, mostly because we have this unfortunate tendency to point out when things are fundamentally broken, and leadership does not always appreciate that kind of honesty. But here I was, sitting at a table with admirals, generals, senior scientists, and political officials who all looked like they had just watched their entire worldview collapse. Which, to be fair, they kind of had. High Chancellor Drexmith called the meeting to order with a sharp crack of her crystalline appendage against the table. She was old, even by her species standards, and she had the kind of presence that made you sit up straight without even thinking about it. "Explain," she said, looking directly at Vosnarl. "Explain how we spent 400 billion credits on a weapon that does not work." "It does work, Chancellor," Vosnarl protested, his tentacles curling defensively. 53 species tested 100% effectiveness across all trials. The temporal stasis cascade performs exactly as designed. "Except on humans," Admiral Cortex interjected, his voice dripping with the kind of sarcasm that comes from commanding a strike cruiser that just got embarrassed by a cargo crew. "It seems to work on everyone except the one species we actually needed to work on." "We did not test it on humans," I said quietly, and every head in the chamber turned to look at me. We did not think we needed to. They are a newer species, less technologically advanced. We assumed." "You assumed," High Chancellor Drexmith repeated, her tone making the word sound like a curse. 400 billion credits. "And you assume." "In our defense," Vosnarl started, but the Chancellor's glare cut him off mid-sentence. "Dr. Yelveth," the Chancellor said, turning to the head of xenobiology research. "Your team has had 6 hours to study this phenomenon. Tell me you have something useful." Dr. Yelveth was a small, nervous creature who looked like she had not slept in days, which she probably had not. She activated a holographic display at the center of the table showing a 3-dimensional model of human cellular structure. "We have been running continuous scans of human biology since the incident," she began, her voice shaking slightly. "What we have found is, well, it is disturbing. Human cells do not operate on the same baseline physics as well as anything else we have ever encountered." The hologram zoomed in on a single human cell, showing its internal mechanisms in intricate detail. Mitochondria, ribosomes, the nucleus, all the standard components. But something was different. The cell was moving, shifting, constantly adjusting itself in ways that seemed random but were clearly purposeful. Human cells exist in what we are calling a state of perpetual crisis response, Dr. Yelveth continued. Their homeworld, Earth, is classified as a Class 12 death world. For context, most civilized species evolve on Class 3 or Class 4 worlds. Anything above Class 8 is considered uninhabitable. We know Earth is hostile, Admiral Korthax said impatiently. What does that have to do with our weapon? Everything, Admiral, Dr. Yelveth replied, pulling up comparison data. Look at this. This is a Grelthian cell under normal conditions. Stable, predictable, operating within expected parameters. Now look at a human cell under the exact same condition. The hologram split, showing both cells side by side. The Grelthian cell was calm, orderly, doing its job with mechanical precision. The human cell looked like it was fighting for its life, constantly adapting, shifting, compensating for threats that were not even present. Human cells are adapted to survive in an environment with wildly fluctuating gravity, temperature, atmospheric pressure, radiation exposure, and temporal distortions caused by their planet's frankly absurd magnetic field, Dr. Yelveth explained. Their biology does not just adapt to change, it anticipates change. It exists in a state of permanent readiness for the next catastrophe. I leaned forward studying the data. So when we hit them with the temporal stasis cascade, their cells treated it as just another environmental fluctuation to compensate for. Dr. Yelveth finished. The field slowed down their temporal progression, yes, but their cellular structure immediately began adapting. Mitochondria shifted their energy production. Neural pathways rerouted signals through quantum tunneling effects that should not be possible in biological tissue. Their entire cardiovascular system recalibrated to function under altered space-time conditions. The chamber fell silent as everyone processed this information. Are you telling me, High Chancellor Drexmith said slowly, that humans are biologically immune to temporal manipulation because their planet is so horrifically hostile that their cells evolved to just what? Ignore physics? Not ignore, Chancellor. Compensate, Dr. Yelveth corrected. Human biology operates on a completely different set of baseline assumptions. Where our cells expect stability and struggle with change, human cells expect chaos and struggle with stability. We designed the temporal stasis cascade to target normal biological functions. Humans do not have normal biological functions. She pulled up another dataset, this one showing human responses to various environmental stresses. The numbers were frankly terrifying. Humans can survive temperature ranges that would kill most species. Their bodies can function under gravitational forces that would pulp our internal organs. They heal from injuries that would be fatal to us. They have a secondary cardiovascular pump, a backup system, just in case the first one fails. They have a nervous system that can reroute around damaged sections. Their skeletal structure is reinforced with a mineral compound that is harder than most light armor plating. They are a weapons platform disguised as a sentient species, someone muttered from the back of the chamber. Essentially, yes, Dr. Yelveth agreed. And our weapon was designed to stop normal biological processes by manipulating the quantum framework of cellular function. But human cells do not follow normal processes. They cannot be frozen in stasis because they are already operating in a state of controlled chaos. The temporal stasis cascade might as well be trying to stop a fire by adding more fire. Vosusnarl had gone very quiet, his tentacles drooping in a way that indicated profound distress. So the weapon works perfectly, he said softly. It just works perfectly on everyone except the one species that evolved to survive anything the universe could throw at them. Correct, Dr. Yelveth confirmed. The temporal stasis cascade is an excellent weapon against any civilization that evolved in a rational environment. Humans did not evolve in a rational environment. They evolved in a nightmare that somehow achieved planetary stability long enough for sapient life to develop. Their biology reflects that. I was running calculations in my head, and none of them were making me happy. If their cells can compensate for temporal distortion, I said, then they can probably compensate for most quantum-based weapons. Anything that relies on manipulating space-time or gravitational constants. Our entire weapons development program for the last decade, Admiral Korthax said, his voice hollow. Everything we have been building is based on quantum manipulation technology, which will be largely ineffective against humans, Dr. Yelveth confirmed. Their biology has built-in countermeasures that evolved over millions of years. We have been trying to hack physics for a few decades. They have been doing it since before they discovered fire. High Chancellor Drexmith stood up, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights in sharp, angry patterns. So let me make sure I understand this completely. We have created a weapon that works on everyone in the galaxy except the species we are most likely to come into conflict with, and that species now knows we have this weapon, knows how it works, and is probably already figuring out how to reverse engineer it for their own use. Nobody answered. Mostly because what could you say? She had summarized the situation perfectly. Oh, and one more thing, Chancellor, Dr. Yelvith added, looking miserable. Based on what we have learned about human adaptability, if they do reverse engineer the temporal stasis cascade, their version will probably work on them too. Their biology will just adapt to account for the fact that they built it. I dropped my head into my hands. Of course the humans would be able to use the weapon on themselves. Of course they would be able to adapt to their own technology. Because why would the universe give us even one small advantage? This meeting is adjourned, High Chancellor Drexmith announced. We will reconvene in 12 hours to discuss our next steps. In the meantime, someone send a diplomatic message to the humans. Something polite, something that does not make them angry. What should we say? Someone asked. The Chancellor thought for a moment. Apologize for the misunderstanding, return their people, and maybe ask very nicely if they would be willing to not tell everyone else in the galaxy that our ultimate weapon does not work on them. As the council filed out of the chamber, I stayed behind, staring at the holographic display of the human cell. It pulsed and shifted, adapting to phantom threats, never stopping, never resting, just endlessly compensating for a hostile universe. We had tried to freeze them in time, and their biology had simply shrugged and kept going. Terrifying. Absolutely terrifying. The diplomatic fallout was, in a word, catastrophic. The humans, to their credit, were actually quite gracious about the whole incident. They returned our boarding party unharmed, sent back our assault shuttle with detailed notes about its structural weaknesses, and even included a gift basket of something called coffee and donuts, which our xenobiology team immediately quarantined as potential biohazards. The accompanying message was professionally worded, carefully neutral, and absolutely dripping with the kind of polite condescension that only comes from someone who knows they have won. They did not tell the rest of the galaxy about our weapon's failure, which was surprisingly decent of them. Of course, they did not need to tell anyone, because within 2 weeks every intelligence agency in known space had figured it out anyway. Turns out that when you deploy your ultimate weapon 4 times in a single day and it fails every single time against the same species, people notice. The collective's military reputation, which we had spent centuries carefully cultivating, evaporated overnight. We went from being a feared technological powerhouse to being the species that built a weapon that only works on our friends. Several of our allies quietly began renegotiating their defense treaties. 3 border systems declared independence. The Galactic Stock Exchange downgraded our credit rating. And the humans? Oh, the humans were having a wonderful time. Within a month, they had reverse engineered the temporal stasis cascade. Not just figured out how it worked, but actually improved it. Their version was smaller, more efficient, and required 30% less power. They filed patents. They published papers. They offered to sell the technology to other species at what they called competitive prices, which I am fairly certain is human code for "we are going to make an obscene amount of money off your failure." The most insulting part. Their version worked on humans too. Dr. Yelveth had been right. They had built the same weapon we built, but because they understood their own biology's adaptive mechanisms, they knew how to calibrate it to overcome their cellular compensation. They had turned our ultimate weapon into a commercially available product in less time than it took us to file the initial incident reports. I was reassigned, of course. Mid-level engineers make excellent scapegoats, and someone had to take the blame for not testing the weapon on every single species in the galaxy. I now work in the Department of Waste Reclamation, which is exactly as glamorous as it sounds. My job is to catalog broken equipment and determine if anything can be salvaged. Last week I processed the remains of the temporal stasis cascade prototype. 400 billion credits, 8 cycles of research, the combined efforts of our finest scientific minds, all reduced to scrap metal and disconnected quantum matrices. I filed it under total loss and moved on to the next item. Vosselsnarl retired. The official reason was to pursue personal projects, but everyone knows he just could not face the humiliation anymore. I heard he moved to a remote colony world where nobody knows who he is. I hope he finds peace there, though I doubt it. Some failures follow you no matter how far you run. The thing that keeps me up at night, though, is not the failure itself. It is the principle behind it. We tried to stop the humans using the fundamental laws of physics. We manipulated space-time, bent gravity, hacked the quantum framework of reality itself. We did everything right, followed every scientific principle, built a weapon that should have been impossible to resist. And the humans just walked through it because somewhere in their evolutionary history they decided that the laws of physics were more like suggestions and their biology agreed. You cannot fight a species like that. You cannot build a weapon that works on beings who have evolved to treat universal constants as minor inconveniences. The humans did not beat us with superior technology or better tactics. They beat us by simply refusing to acknowledge that they should have been beaten. I have spent my entire career building weapons, and I have learned one important lesson from all of this. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is not a doomsday device or a fleet of warships or a reality-warping superweapon. The most dangerous thing in the galaxy is a species that looks at impossible odds and thinks, yeah, we can work with this. The humans have that quality in abundance. They came from a planet that tried to kill them every single day, and instead of developing sensible survival instincts like avoid danger or seek stable environments, they developed the ability to just ignore the danger and adapt. Their planet threw gravity fluctuations at them. They adapted. It threw radiation at them. They adapted. It threw predators, diseases, natural disasters, and apparently temporal distortions at them, and they just kept adapting. And now they are out here in space, surrounded by species who evolved in rational environments with predictable physics, and they are treating the entire galaxy like it is just another hostile environment to adapt to. We built a weapon to stop them. They turned it into a commercial product. That pretty much sums up the human approach to existence. You cannot stop them. You can only hope they like you enough to not step on you while they are busy adapting to whatever impossible thing the universe throws at them next. The temporal stasis cascade was supposed to change the balance of power in the galaxy. It did, just not in our favor. The humans now have the technology, the patents, and the reputation as the species that cannot be stopped by physics itself. And me? I am cataloging garbage and trying not to think about how my life's work ended up being the setup for someone else's success story. 400 billion credits. 8 cycles of research. 100% effectiveness on everyone except the only species that matter. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. It is just not a very kind one.